"I didn't think you were alive to see such times," said Atassi. "I wasn't," admitted Honshu. "I was elevated to the Legion in the aftermath of the war." "So I heard," replied Atassi, glancing over at Cadaris Grendel. No doubt the Mohawked warrior had delighted in telling Atassi of Honshu's mongrel heritage. "I may not have faced the walls of Terra, but I have stood before countless others, and they have all fallen. There is no wall that can be thrown up before me that I cannot tear down. The great Perturabo might not venture from his lair in the mountains of Medringard, but his warriors continue the long war in his name. If flattening castles is such a joy to the Iron Warriors, then why is he not here?" Honshu shook his head. "Perturabo has 1,000 lifetimes worth of hate in his heart," he said, remembering the deep, dark valleys of the mountains and the dread temples and forsaken towers of Perturabo's nightmare city. Though he had not seen the fallen Primarch of the Iron Warriors, he had felt his brooding hate on the bitter winds, howling through every haunted street. And such a warrior does not stir for any but the most titanic of conflicts. The enemies of the Imperium employ untold underhanded tricks, schemes, and methods to achieve victory in the name of their fell patrons. Cutthroats, renegades, and killers all, only the most brutal tyrants can sustain their rise to power and continual survival against more dangerous foes. For today, we shall elucidate a champion of chaos, tainted from birth of his kinsman's greatest enemy, the half-breed of the Iron Warriors, Warsmith Honshu. The origins of this conniving mongrel, largely unknown even to himself. What can be gleaned of his creation rests in the hands of the man-flayer, Fabius Bile. His gene seed, a chimeric blend between Astartes of diametrically opposed creeds. Such were the experiments of the spider that he injected the War Mason of Warsmith Toromino's 235th Grand Battalion, Honorable Sulaka of the Dodecaphion, with Zyklos toxins for securing gene seed taken from his slain battle brother, Kalimos. Stealing his gene seed from his still-living body, with genetic materials of the Imperial Fist captain of the 42nd Company, Felix Cassander, proving a viable pairing, having used his body for myriad procedures as a test subject for pathogens, retroviruses, gene splicing, and other abhorrent surgeries. Bile's laboratory erupting in chemically induced flames by his Tarata creations, the reborn captain of the Emperor's Children 13th Company, Lucius, would aid his salvation of gene samples, saving the vial of Honorable Sulaka, whose damaged label now read simply as Hon-Su. Such genetic samples finally leading to the creation of this half-breed Astartes during the 41st millennium. Honshu learned the craft of his much-diluted legion within Warsmith Tarasios' great company. Hated intensely by his peers due to the Imperial Fist blood flowing through his veins, during 999.M41, this industrious Iron Warrior would eke out a legacy which would exceed even the greatest of his purebred peers. Abaddon the Despoiler, ordering the warband of Barban Falk to lay siege to the forward world of Hydra Caudatus. The demon-possessed being, now known simply as the Warsmith, sought to claim the secret stockpile of Imperial Fist gene seed, which lay beneath its surface. The fortress containing their prize, having been designed by Barban Falk during the Great Crusade, the Warsmith knew the perfect weaknesses to exploit, and for his efforts millennia in the planning would achieve ascension should he succeed in his endeavor. Supported by the ancient Warsmiths, Foryx and Kroger, as well as their respective first and second Grand Companies, the promising Honshu as a champion of Falk sought to earn glory as a means to achieve favor from his master. Warsmith Kroger, despising Honshu's status as a commander of his own great company, this thrall of the Blood God enacted great feats of slaughter in order to compete with Honshu's cunning strategies and capable command. Warsmith Foryx, having refused to fight within the thick of battle for years, having become jaded with his legion following the siege of Terra. Little would the former Triarch realize the genius of this upstart half-breed. Deploying Titans of the Legio Mortis, including the infamous Dies Irae, to combat Legio Ignatum using a captured Tyranid bioship. This blasphemy, created by Honshu, had been dragged into the Eye of Terror, and once infected with the Flayer virus, corrupted to his will. Besetting the Mars and Dragon Bastions, as an estimated 30 to 40,000 Iron Warriors unleashed their fury. As the Legion captured survivors to be used as disposable labor, Warsmith Kroger would take a liking to the tenacious lieutenant, Laranna Utorian. Honshu accused of thinking like an Imperial in his methods of waging war. Despite such aspersions, Warsmith Foryx found renewed purpose through his example as a true Iron Warrior and took to the field of battle once more. Laying siege to the manufacturing complex of Tor Christo, Imperial Fistbird Captain Ishara witnessed the loss of 10,000 defenders of its domains by a torpedo bombardment. Dueling the mortal Castellan of Jura, Prestre de Roche-Vauban VI. Though killing his opponent, Honshu's left arm would be severed as his forces invaded the facility. Falk entrusting Honshu with a cybernetic replacement taken from his former champion, Kortrish. Yet as Honshu's star rose, his peers fell precipitously, Foryx growing embittered by his treatment by the half-breed, as Kroger was slain by Laranna Utorian within his chambers, with her claiming his armor as the demon within its embrace empowered her form. The defending forces of Hydra Caudatus failing to prevent the Iron Warrior's conquest of the Citadel, Warsmith Foryx would be felled by a Titan during the final battle, whilst the impostor of Kroger fled the field to pursue the call of Khorne. Honshu alone of Barb and Falk's champions remaining, his efforts had secured the renewal of the Iron Warrior's Legion, now that they could replenish their numbers, corrupting the gene seed of their most hated foe. Falk entrusting his army to Honshu's care with his promotion to the rank of Warsmith. Following Barban's transformation into a demon prince, the being ventured into the roiling tides of the warp to pursue ventures beyond the comprehension of mortal men. Yet the half-breed had outlived his ancient rivals and would return to the domains of the Lord of Iron, bearing gifts to renew his legion, leaving only a single mortal survivor upon Hydra Caudatus to retell the deeds of their conquest. Returning to the demon world of Medrengard within the depths of the Eye of Terror, though Honshu would dispatch the majority of his pilfered gene seed to Abaddon the Despoiler, the conniving half-breed kept much of his spoils for himself. Crafting disgusting parodies of life within his fortress of Karlan Gol as part of his creation known as the Demunculaba, human females would be corrupted with fell technologies and arcane sorcery in order to carry out his experiments. Quite possibly the most disgraceful atrocity committed to the arts of fleshcrafting. Each adolescent boy forcefully impregnated into the Demunculaba produced skinless abominations known as the Unfleshed, as a byproduct of failed aspirants. Casting the Unfleshed to die within the wastelands of Medrengard, as viable Iron Warriors were added to the fold of Honshu's army, the Warsmith retracted his pledge to share the spoils of Hydra Caudatus with his peers, causing a civil war to erupt upon the demon world. Warsmiths Toromino and Berossus laying siege to Karlan Gol. Within the midst of such a power struggle, a pair of Ultramarines pilgrims would be thrust into the conflict. Captain Uriel Ventress, tasked to seek out a place of dark iron by Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius as a means to cleanse himself of his sins commit upon the world of Tarsus Ultra. His abandoning of his men to deliver a fatal payload against the Tyranid menace required a death oath of great penance. Alongside his stalwart comrade-in-arms, veteran Sergeant Pausanias Lysane, the duo were spirited to Medrengard due to the schemes of the warp entity known as the Omphalos Daemonium, its entreaty to achieve their objective, simultaneously benefiting its own plots. Found upon by the former Raven Guard Shadow Captain and Red Corsair, Arderic Varness, and his band of renegades who had already thwarted the Omphalos Daemonium supplying of flesh materials to the fortress of Karlan Gol. Together, the Astartes infiltrated the domains of Honshu. Captured by the Warsmith's bodyguard, Onyx, within the halls of the Savage Morticians, Uriel Ventress was entombed within a broodmare of the Demunculaba. Honshu removing Lysane's necrodermis arm brought from his venture to the tomb world of Pavonis. Replacing his bionic appendage with the silver arm stolen from Pausanias, Honshu marveled at the strange self-repairing materials as far superior to anything his own forges could create. Ventress escaping from the Demunculaba and reuniting with Pausanias, the Ultramarines with unlikely aid from the Unfleshed, who remained devoted to the Master of Mankind, allowed the disgraced captain to devise a plan to destroy the Demunculaba. Warsmith Berossus storming the Citadel during the mayhem, Honshu felled the ancient warrior, claiming his forces to join him in persecuting his last remaining rival, Toromino. Ventress and his allies of mutants and renegades infiltrating Honshu's Citadel once more, the band of warriors released the Cornate Greater Demon, the Heart of Blood, bound within the depths of Karlan Gol. The psychic barrier sustained by the Bloodthirster, faltering Allowing Toromino's forces to unleash devastation upon the fortress, Honshu incurred a wound from Ventress as a bolt round of the captain's pistol struck the back of his head. Destroying the Demonculaba once and for all, as the Heart of Blood exorcised the Omphalos Demonium in the process, Ventress, Pausanias, and the Unfleshed made their escape aboard the entity, escaping the Eye of Terror. The toil of Honshu, despite his best efforts, had fallen to ruin and would never be forgiven. Finding upon the exhausted Heart of Blood, the Warsmith unleashed its power against Toromino, leaving a chasm which extends to the lair of Perturabo, tearing the souls of all within its wake to be fed to the Black Sun of Medrengard. This day, a true nemesis had escaped the half-breed's grasp, and never again would Honshu suffer such a slight. Departing from Medrengard in search of resources to enact retribution against Ventress, whilst the War Master healed from his cranial augmetics to repair his damaged skull, a band of misfits would join the Warsmith in his endeavour. Cadaris Grendel, once pledged to Warsmith Berossus, gave his somewhat flimsy loyalty to Honshu out of pure self-interest. The renegade Raven, Arderic Varnes, also joining his warband, now embittered against Ventress. Yet most depraved of all of Honshu's lieutenants would be that of the result of Uriel's entombing within the Demonculaba, a skinless copy of the heroic fourth captain, which regarded itself simply as the Newborn. Stitching ill-fitting skin onto its form, which healed at an accelerated rate, the Newborn inherited much of Ventress's memories, martial skill, and indomitable willpower, despite being a poor reflection of such a noble soul. Honshu's army, much depleted following the civil war upon Medrengard, with no means to replenish their number with the destruction of the Demonculaba and his fortress of Karlan Gol, the band of spiteful killers ventured from the Eye of Terror to the world of Tarsus Ultra. Claiming the flagship of his former master, the Warbreed, from the Crooked Tower of Medrengard, this void craft which had unleashed fury upon both Istvan V and the gates of the Imperial Palace of Terror would prove a fitting chariot for this horseman of the apocalypse. Helmed by Adept Etolf Cicerin of Hydra Caudatus, now pledged to serve the whims of Honshu with its merging with the Obliterator virus, the corrupted tech priest proved invaluable in the battles to come as perhaps the Warsmith's most loyal subordinate. Varnes training the inexperienced Newborn on the methods of combat during their venture, his stalwart renegade lieutenants, Sviolgard of the Wolf Brothers and Jafar of the White Consuls, died by the warp creature's hands, much to the amusement of the Raven. Completing their warp jump to Tarsus Ultra, the Warbreed slipped through the planet's patrols thanks to the Veritas deployment protocol codes imparted to the Newborn's memories. Already harried due to Ventress's combat made against the Tyranids prior to his exploits beneath the Black Sun of Perturabo's domains, Honshu's men deployed upon defense platform Ultra 9. Slaughtering the defenders under the pretense as inbound Ultramarines forces, Honshu began to adapt to the changes to his right arm and Ormetic stolen from the savage Morticians. His demon-infused axe refusing to be grasped by the appendage which proved anathema to its being, as the entity within attempted to assert its will through Honshu's limbs. Its tendrils knew better to ever encroach near the energies, which coursed through his silvered arm. Seizing the platform's missile payload, the Iron Warriors fired 16 torpedoes to saturate the atmosphere with strains of the Heraclitus virus, its infection of what remained of the dormant Tyranid flora causing the eco-death of the planet. Rampant hypermutated plant life breathed deep from the air of Tarsus Ultra, sapping the soil of all nutrients as their insatiable metabolism raised the temperature of the world, as within mere weeks the world's atmosphere dissipated, suffocating the populace. Magos Locard descending upon the barren surface months after the Iron Warriors had withdrawn. A single warhead contained within it the damaged helmet of Uriel Ventress, salvaged from his dealings upon Medrengard. Honshu's warning to the Ultramarines merely a prelude to the devastation to come. With Tarsus Ultra destroyed, a devastating blow had been dealt to Uriel Ventress, yet in order to bring low the realm of Ultramar, nothing short of an armada would be required to contest the domains of the Scions of Guilliman. Venturing to the heart of the Maelstrom, within the Badab sector, Honshu, under the advisements of Varnes, entered the tournament of Huron Blackheart, known as the Skull Harvest, a contest of strength, leadership, and cunning, wherein the prize to the victor would be an entire fleet comprised of his foes' assembled strength. Upon the soil of New Badab, multiple warbands and their Chaos champions vied for dominance. Ardaric, once a member of the Red Corsairs and survivor of the trials of the Skull Harvest, his insight into the blood sports would prove invaluable as Honshu prepared for the battles to come, poring over ancient tomes retrieved from the archives of Kolan Gol before its destruction. Whilst middling warbands sacrificed their thralls in the name of their patron gods, Honshu readied for the trials to follow the Skull Harvest. Confronted by the fallen side of the Emperor, Vosok Dal, prior to the commencement of the harvest, Honshu struck down the scion of the Blood God, gaining the notice of his master, the Butcher of Formand, Pashtok Uluvent. Assembling before the throne of the Blackheart, as each champion attended the Day of Sacrifices, pledging offerings to the Tyrant of Badab. For the first time in his life, Honshu felt true fear in the presence of such an imposing despot. Striking the half-breed with his tyrant's claw for uttering a callously uttered threat to his person. Regardless of the bluster of the Warsmith, Huron respected Honshu's commitment to fight for a grand vision beyond the ambition of his rivals. As the start of the conflict drew closer, Honshu's lieutenants honed their martial skill. Varnes training with the blade dancer Slaneshi warband of Nofa Etasi, whilst the newborn studied the arts of the Xenos Ioxotil mercenaries. Cadaris Grendel defecting to the warband of Uluvent and his Cornate berserkers. Regardless, Honshu knew that one day his captain of arms would defect, should a cause more palatable to his ambition present itself. Every warband assembling to fight within the arena of Thorns, Huron tore the still-beating heart from a captured Howling Griffin as a sign of the contest's commencement. Varnes and the newborn winning every bout of their 4 days of combat, as the overlords of each warband were slain. Only 3 remained: Uluvent, Etasi, and Honshu. The champion of Khorne cutting his own throat prior to their battle, stating that should he bleed out before gutting his foes, he would be unworthy of his victory. The free dueling at the conclusion of the Skull Harvest, as Honshu disarmed Uluvent of his weapon, Etasi struck, Honshu breaking the sword of Pashtok before dealing a crippling blow to Etasi. Uluvent brawling with Honshu, the Warsmith dug the metallic fingers of his silvered arm deep into the Cornate's neck wound, tearing open the already healing flesh before being hurled away by the Berserker. Demanding his warband to provide him with a new weapon, Grendel presented a sword to his new master, reversing its grip and driving its edge deep into Uluvent's chest, moments before he grasped its hilt. Grendel's defection merely a ploy to gain the upper hand against Pashtok. With the duel's conclusion, Honshu's army burgeoned from 5,000 warriors to over 16,000, the combined strength of 17 warbands of chaos, now his to command. Huron Blackheart congratulating him on his victory, as Nofa Etasi pledged to serve at his side. Before his departure from New Badab, Honshu would be warned by the tyrant that the strong are strongest alone, advising him to kill his companions once their usefulness was at an end. Now presiding over an army united in purpose, Honshu required only one thing before invading the Ultramar system: an ally, an embittered foe capable of tearing Guilliman's sons apart, fueled by an unquenchable need for retribution. Successful in his decoding of the ancient text of Medrungard, after months of deciphering its ramblings, riddles, and contrasting claims of multilingual etchings, upon a world without a name, the Warsmith sought the seer of Abaddon, Moriana. Demanding the location of the so-called thrice-born father of the Blue Sun, mentioned within the ancient texts, the prophecy that in the time of ending, the being would enact vengeance against Ultramar, was a perfect means for Honshu to achieve his own ambitions. Revealing the Bane of Zalanthras to have been contained within the warp drive of the Void Station Indomitable by Marneus Calgar during 935.1041, should the Demon Prince be freed from its bondage, Ultramar would be brought low. Moriana herself, hunted by Uriel Ventress 2 decades prior during his tenure as a member of the Death Watch. The Prophet forewarned Honshu that the clone of the 4th Captain, though a boon for his insight into the dealings of Uriel, would soon descend into madness. Its mind collapsing following their departure from New Badab, though its form had been bolstered with its time spent within the Maelstrom. Such an affront to nature could not contain the mind of a mirrored soul of a still living being. Setting upon the Indomitable, near the realm of Escaro Exterio, its garrison of the Ultramarines 5th Company, the Wardens of the Eastern Fringe, under the command of Sergeant Olantor, were unprepared for the impending assault. The efforts of Interrogator Tertius, Sabia Montserrat, her Datayan Saurian regiment, and thousands of Ultramar auxiliaries insufficient to defend the Bastion gauntlets from the siege of the Iron Warriors. Venerable Dreadnought Altarian fending off Honshu's most devastating push to reach the warp drive. Only with the collision of the Infidel-class Voidcraft, Fellclaw, under the advisement of Atasi, would the Iron Warriors reach their goal. The Ultramarines making their last stand, protecting the warp drive. Montserrat, as a desperate last gambit, released a confined Eversor assassin to defeat their foe. Her men toiling to drag the Indomitable into a gravity well, killing all hands. The Eversor and Atasi, dueling as Honshu witnessed this once-in-a-lifetime battle of blades. The Lord of the Blade Dancers incurred the neurotoxin-laced needles of the assassin, convulsing in painful ecstasy until his thrashing broke his own spine. The Newborn, defending Honshu from a plunge of the assassin's claws as they dug into his chest. With aid from Arderic Varnes, the Warsmith buried his axe into the creature's chest, causing its body to explode into chemical flames. Cadarus Grendel, slaying Sergeant Olantor with his melter, before pushing Interrogator Sabia into the flaming energies of the warp drive. Honshu demanded his men to preserve Dreadnought Altarian as they released Makar from its confinement. Possessing the Dreadnought's form, as its limbs malformed into fell appendages, the Fryspawn, now released from its prison, summoned the hordes of demons pledged to serve its whims. Now ready to bleed Ultramar for every slight made against him by Uriel Ventris, Honshu's warband allied to the Bloodborne of Makar first set upon the Agriworld of Tarentus. Hordes of demons spilling forth from the warp gate, tethered to the Indomitable. Slaughtering the entire population as a means to wound the Ultramarine sense of duty, honor, and nobility. The vaunted chapter could not allow such an affront to stand uncontested. Marneus Calgar, unleashing the entire might of the Ultramarines with vengeance in his heart. Ensnared by a trap within the city of Axum, Ventris' fourth company came close to annihilation at the hands of a warband of Khornate Berserkers. The ocean world of Talasar, the next planet which would incur the Bloodborne's wrath, as the homeworld of the Indomitable captain, Cato Sicarius, defended against the bulk of their forces. The Corsair Queen, Karja Solombar, attacked Espandor alongside the Skulltaker's warband, while senior adept Vothia Tark beset Quintan. Honshu, settling for nothing less than the homeworld of Uriel Ventris, Kalf. His entire grand company, supported by the Dark Mechanicus of Magos Cicerin, began their inexorable advance upon the soil of this much beleaguered world. Already beset during the era of the Horus Heresy by the Wordbearer's Legion, the poisoning of its sun left its surface irradiated, forcing the survivors to the conflict to live underground within the world's vast subterranean tunnels. The hero of Calf, Captain Remus Ventanus, interred within a tomb made in his honor. Its holy presence was anathema to the Fryspawn, and thus the Demon Prince could not lay it low by its own hands. Makar the Reborn, requiring the destruction of the venerated legend's resting place, as retribution for its prior death when inhabiting the form of the Dark Apostle, known as Malok Cartho. Honshu accepted the terms to enact its will, simply to despoil the hallowed ground of the former captain of the Fourth Company. Magos Cicerin, uploading scrap code into the planet's orbital defense platforms, allowing for the Bloodborne to make planetfall. The Ultramarines fell back to Guilliman's Gate, which led to the population centers of Chaos civilians. Arderic Varnes and his Ioxetal mercenaries, scaling Guilliman's Gate, as the Iron Warriors cut off Sergeant Liarcus from his forces. Despite his gains made, the renegade would be captured by the Raven Guard captain, Aphon Shan. Working alongside the veteran of the Long War, Sultan Vulbron, whose expertise at trench warfare were unparalleled, Honshu was a show to his men that he was willing to die for victory, personally dug trenches within the heart of battle to aid Bron's advance. Despite being struck by an artillery shell within the Four Valleys Gorge, Honshu's body would be unearthed from Calf soil by Bron, who for his efforts would be awarded command of the battles to come. Completing the bridgehead for their future battles, Honshu bade Bron not to achieve victory in order to prevent reinforcements from reaching the Ultramarines' position. His own mission to breach the tomb of Ventanus taking precedence, despite both knowing that Bron and his men would forfeit their lives in the coming days. As the cultists above pushed forward, using warp lightning to harry the Ultramarines' artillery, Honshu and his men reached the tomb of Ventanus within the Caverna Straconi, using the newborn's memories shared of Ventris' youth. Finding upon the Athame dagger, known as the Shard of Erebus, interred within Ventanus' tomb, Honshu realized such an artifact to be the true reason Makar refused to destroy the tomb personally, due to its ability to permanently slay demonic entities. Confronted by Uriel, his command squad, and the turncoat Varnes, mayhem erupted within the tomb. Ventress dueling the disgusting clone of his body, driving the shard of Erebus into its flesh, ending its pain forevermore, despite incurring a wound to his eye from an undetonated bolter shell. Honshu setting upon Ventress, as the brute force of his necrodermis arm threatened to bludgeon him to death. Arderek Varnes slew Cadaris Grendel before turning his claws against his master of convenience. Slain by Honshu, as the Iron Warriors gained ground against Ventress's men, in their time of greatest need, the spirit of Remus Ventanus rose from the grave to aid their plight. Fighting at the side of the Legion of the Damned, the Ultramarine slew the invaders of the tomb. Honshu evading capture by detonating explosives to cover his escape, collapsing the burial site. Escaping the collapsing tomb of Remus Ventanus using a drilling machine used to breach the complex. For 6 months, the citizenry of Ultramar would spread rumors of the so-called Beast of Calth, which tormented the populace. Scavenging equipment from the dormant battlefields with which his men had perished. With time, Inquisitor Namira Suzaku, responsible for the cleansing of Calth's warp maladies, would investigate rumors of the so-called Beast. On the planet of Talassa, Makar the Reborn was slain thanks to the Shard of Erebus. The world of Calth reclaimed under supervision of Sergeant Liarchus with Ventress's absence, and aid from the Raven Guard as they felled the mobile cathedral of the ruinous powers, the Black Basilica. The men of Sultan Valbron, driven underground as the Bloodborne fragmented, as he recited the teachings of Barabbas D'Antioch, that the final stage of a siege is to rig explosives to deal the last devastating blow, Sergeant Liarchus ended his life, unimpressed with his recital of the Unbreakable Litany. The results of Honshu's ambush of the Calthian Planetary Defense Patrol Squad of Sergeant Joel reported to Suzaku. Alongside Ultramarine's brother Dante and Apothecary Silenus, Namira would witness the main bodies left by the half-breed's rampage. Questioning the survivor of the ordeal, Milotas, as to what Honshu had spoken of. Before succumbing to his wounds, the trooper spoke that the beast sought to destroy Calth as his greatest siege work. Surmising his intent to sabotage the Mechanicus geothermal power generators of Ares Pyros. Should such facilities falter, the planet's subterranean hives would overheat, to the point that all life within would perish. Tracking Honshu to a fuel relay station en route to Ares Pyros, finding its feed lines destroyed. Sightings of an Iron Warrior Seeker drone above the facility seemed too obvious to not be a trap, yet Brother Dante could not ignore such a threat to the populace. Dante leading his brethren of Silenus, Priam, Cain, Ophion, and Suzaku's retinue to the exposed entrance of the facility. The Astartes charged through explosive traps, evading as best they could, with minimal casualties. Finding upon a kneeling Iron Warrior, who was promptly shot. Upon inspection of the months-old corpse of Cadaris Grendel, the Ultramarines realized they had been lured away from Honshu's true objective. Stowing away aboard a reserve fuel tank of a Chimera as it withdrew to the spaceport of Highside City, Honshu delighted in killing its crew before enacting his coup de grace. Infiltrating the corpse hall of Voidcraft, known as the Shen Dao, as it ventured to the cemetery world of Nikila, a detachment of 3 Ultramarines known as Amvaram, Maidon, and Silosan would protect the crew of the vessel. Holding the ship's navigator hostage and using Nobilite override codes to change the ship's trajectory away from Nikila, Honshu lay in wait for the Ultramarines, slaying all as they traversed the warp, using his necrodermis arm to protect him from bolter fire and the navigator's gaze to stun his enemies. Reuniting with his men aboard the Warbreed, Honshu set aside his ambitions to destroy Ultramar, content with humbling the realm and its people through countless acts of devastation. Setting course for Medrengard, the Warsmith had lost his armies and his lieutenants, yet still he had survived, and with his reputation now infamous as the man who brought the Ultramarines close to ruin, the half-breed resolved to finally meet with his liege lord, Perturabo.
You still believe in the old ways, Bronn. That's always been your problem.
The old ways were good enough for Lord Perturabo,
said Bronn.
And look where that got him,
said Honshu with sudden anger.
Stuck in a dead city on Medrengard, imprisoned by his own bitterness and resentment. If he cared so much about the wrongs done to him, why isn't he out here bringing every Imperial stronghold to ruin? There isn't one fortress wall left standing that he couldn't put to rubble in a day.
Honshu's vehemence surprised Bronn. He hadn't thought the Warsmith cared anything for the Long War, or Perturabo's notable absence from its battles. Had Bronn misjudged him, or was this yet another piece of theatre, designed to achieve an end that could not yet be seen?
The ways of our master are not for us to judge.
he said. The words sounded hollow even to him.
You're wrong,
said Honshu.
They are ours to judge, and one day someone will take Perturabo to task for his lack of action.
That made Bronn laugh.
Really? And who will that be? You?
Honshu's anger vanished, and Bronn was reminded how unpredictable Honshu could be. As violent as a berserker, or as capricious as a pleasure seeker of the Dark Prince.
Who knows?
Said Honshu, with a broken tooth grin.
Maybe I will one day. Wouldn't that be delicious? A half-breed mongrel bastard sat upon the ivory throne. What I wouldn't give to see old Foryx's face if he could have lived to see that.
You're insane,
said Bronn, as sure of that fact as he was about the composition of Kauf's bedrock.
You might be right.
This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Spite, bitterness, and revenge are potent emotions, the destruction fueled by deeds made in their name, doubtless capable of changing the world around you. Yet never has an act of rancor benefited the world. The light of goodwill, benevolence, and compassion, a more difficult path, but reaping a less bitter reward. Should you hold on to grudges, be careful they do not fester. For while a slight should never be ignored, when possible, they must be forgiven. For the corrosive effect of such emotions is not confined only to yourself. For in time, such venom shall spread, and all those afflicted shall suffer in the name of grievances long forgotten, for the sake of pride.